the cameras flashed, or, well, in this case, the ring light turned on. The crowd froze. And just like that, Hollywood and the internet had a brand new obsession.
Right. A very real, very public collapse.
Exactly. Welcome to Starscope Report. Join Jordan and Jamie as they uncover Hollywood drama, music industry shakeups, and viral influencer scandals. From red carpet surprises to social media controversies, we dive deep into the stories behind the fame.
And today's story is, it's intense. We're diving into the person who secretly ruined Jen Hamilton's life.
It is wild. Usually when we talk about a life plan, right, there's this expectation of, like, engineering. You go to college, you get the job, you marry the partner, you buy the house. You just draw the straight line from point A to point B, and you assume the path is going to hold your weight.
Oh, for sure. We desperately want those trajectories to be visible. We categorize them because we need to believe that if we follow the blueprint, the roof won't cave in.
But when that plan ruptures on a massive public stage, the collapse doesn't just belong to you anymore. It suddenly belongs to the audience. And that is the exact intersection we are exploring in today's deep dive.
Yeah, we are unpacking the highly publicized separation of New York Times bestselling author and labor and delivery nurse Jen Hamilton.
And we've pulled together a massive stack of sources to figure this out because there are so many layers. We've got a detailed breakdown of Jen's 2026 memoir, Birth Vibes. We've got celebrity news coverage from Us Weekly and Parade.
Don't forget the transcripts from YouTube commentary videos.
Oh, right, and the scrawling Reddit threads tracking the real-time public reaction, because there is a jarring question at the center of all this.
Which is,
how does an expert whose entire career is based on helping others navigate painful, unexpected, life-altering events, how does she handle the ultimate unexpected life crisis when literally millions of people are watching?
it's a fascinating paradox. But to understand the sheer magnitude of that collapse, we really have to look at the foundation that broke. Because if you trace Jen and her estranged husband Brian back to their roots, this wasn't, a brief Hollywood romance. This was a 14-year bedrock.
14 years is a lifetime.
It really is. They met as camp counselors for sick children in North Carolina. They went to Liberty University together. When they got married in August of 2012, Jen was already 5 months pregnant with their first son, Ellis.
Wow, so they were so young.
Exactly. They were essentially children building a life from absolute scratch.
And they added a second son, Luke, to the mix later. Over those 14 years, they didn't just build a family. They built an entire aesthetic, an entire lifestyle brand, basically.
Right, an idyllic one.
Yeah. Jen was navigating this incredibly demanding, emotionally taxing career as a nurse, while Brian's digital footprint was entirely focused on, like, homesteading, bushcraft, and teaching their boys to appreciate the rugged outdoors.
Which painted this picture of a perfectly balanced partnership. And that is vital to keep in mind because that idyllic partnership was the quiet backdrop to her exploding professional life.
Oh, totally.
While he is building a literal homestead in the woods, she is building a massive online platform that culminates in her 2026 book, Birth Vibes.
And reading through the breakdown of that book, her central philosophy completely shifts how we talk about healthcare. The core message of Birth Vibes isn't about achieving a pain-free, perfectly orchestrated medical procedure.
No, it's much deeper than that.
Exactly. She argues that a good birth experience is entirely about feeling heard, respected, and empowered. It is about how the patient feels, not just what medically happens to them. She introduces these 6 core vibes to manage this: communication, support, adaptability, environment, compassion, and closure.
And what's brilliant is that she grounds these concepts not in, abstract theory, but in visceral reality. Take the first vibe, communication. Yeah. She doesn't use a patient for this. She uses herself.
Right. Back in 2012?
Yeah. She went in for an elective induction. Her friend Taylor happened to be her assigned nurse.
And in that moment, Jen realizes that just knowing someone isn't enough, right? She needs the actual mechanics explained. She asks Taylor to explain exactly what she is doing step by step before she even places the cervical ripening insert.
Which establishes a baseline of absolute transparency for an exhausting labor. She pushed for 90 minutes before they ultimately had to use a vacuum to deliver Ellis.
Gosh.
But she learned that without direct communication, fear just takes over.
Which leads directly to how she handles fear in her own patients, specifically in the chapter on adaptability. We have the story of Brittany, right? A patient at 42 weeks, with an incredibly rigid birth plan.
Oh, the rigid plans. They always go wrong.
Always. This plan essentially forbade any, quote, negativity in the room. But medicine doesn't care about your positive vibes, and a severe complication arises.
And this is where the mechanism of her philosophy really gets tested. They discover thick meconium.
Wait, can you explain what that is for people who don't know?
Yeah, so meconium is fetal stool in the amniotic fluid. This isn't just a minor hiccup. It's a massive red flag for fetal distress that can lead to severe respiratory issues for the baby.
That's terrifying.
It is. Under normal circumstances, a medical team might just rush in, mandate a C-section, and completely ignore the patient's emotional state because of the physical danger.
Which makes sense medically, but emotionally, it's traumatizing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Jen recognizes that Brittany's rigid plan is just a shield. It's masking a profound terror of surgery. So she and the midwife, Sam, use a completely different psychological approach. They physically lower themselves. They actually kneel beside Brittany's bed to remove the physical hierarchy of the hospital room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They calmly lay out the medical reality. Brittany initially refuses the synthetic hormone pitocin, but because Jen and Sam built that foundation of trust, she accepts an alternative medication, Cytotec.
So she adapts. She holds her preferences loosely enough to protect her core value, which is a healthy baby girl, Violet. And you see that same emotional intelligence applied to the compassion vibe with a patient named Anaya. Anaya is a young Black woman who arrives for a C-section, absolutely convinced that the hospital staff is going to let her die.
And we have to pause and look at the why behind that terror. Because Jen does. Jen explicitly addresses the historical and current reality of maternal mortality rates. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in and around childbirth than white women.
Right. It's a systemic failure.
It is.
Yeah.
Anaya's fear is not irrational. It is a learned survival mechanism.
So rather than taking Anaya's distrust personally or just brushing it off like, you'll be fine, Jen leans into extreme compassion. She physically grounds Anaya. She walks her through breathing exercises, introduces her to every single person in the operating room by name, and actively honors that painful historical context rather than gaslighting her into silence.
It's an absolute masterclass in de-escalation.
It really is. But, as I read through these patient stories, it made me rethink how we use the word pivot.
How so?
Well, when you hit a sudden complication like thick meconium, you don't just change your mind. You are forced into a radical, agonizing triage. You have to suppress your panic, identify the immediate threat, and completely rewrite your expectations of the future in real time.
Wow. Yeah.
And looking at what Jen is going through in her personal life right now, she is living that agonizing triage in front of millions of people. But wait till you hear what came next, because the top line here is just crazy.
It really is. That agonizing triage is the exact mechanism of a sudden marital collapse. She is being forced to apply the adaptability vibe to the sudden death of a 14-year relationship. And it is the timing of this collapse that just breaks the human brain.
Right. Lay out the timeline for us.
Okay, so in May 2026, Birth Vibes hits #1 on the New York Times Bestseller list. She has reached the absolute zenith of her professional life. And yet, at the very moment she should be taking a victory lap, rumors are swirling online that her marriage is quietly detonating.
The whiplash is just staggering. On June 15th, they release a joint statement confirming their separation. And in a deeply telling detail about modern communication, they explicitly note that the statement was written, quote, without ChatGPT.
Which is such a desperate plea for authenticity. They're begging the audience to understand that there is real human blood on the floor here. They cite enormous pain and a need for physical distance, for mental healing. But they also frame it carefully, clarifying this isn't about simply falling out of love.
Right. They frame separation not as an abandonment, but as a painful necessity to figure out complex issues.
But you can't keep a narrative perfectly polished when you're in that much pain.
No, you can't. And that's not even the wildest part. A month later, Us Weekly picks up on a shocking claim from Jen. She states that an undercover OPP, meaning opposition, an enemy or saboteur, hijacked her special time with a bunch of, quote, bulls, preventing her from marketing the book she spent years writing.
She doesn't name names, right?
She doesn't name names, but the implication is deafening.
This is the cognitive dissonance of public victory and private defeat. Imagine reaching the peak of a mountain you've climbed for years, only to realize the person you climbed it with is subtly trying to push you off.
It's heartbreaking.
For an audience, watching someone achieve their wildest dreams while their real life burns down off camera is deeply unsettling. We don't have the emotional bandwidth to process triumphant joy and devastating betrayal simultaneously.
And Jen didn't give her audience the luxury of looking away either. That's the wild part. She didn't log off. She stayed online and let her audience watch the messy unraveling in real time. She is posting tearful videos, literally telling her millions of followers that her heart is shattered.
And that level of vulnerability forces a parasocial reckoning. When a fan brought up divorce in the comments, Jen replied with a line that just guts you. "I've never been enough for him."
Oh my God.
Yeah. She followed it up with a TikTok stating, "Me crying for weeks about a man I was loyal to for 15 years who wanted everyone but me."
That is a brutal realization to have in the privacy of your own mind. To broadcast it to the internet requires a level of pain that just overrides all self-preservation instincts.
It's a compulsion to control the narrative when you feel completely out of control of your actual life. But we also see her survival mechanisms kick in.
Yeah, the 5 M's.
Right. She talks about surviving on her 5 M's: meditation, meds, mentorship, mingling, and Megan Thee Stallion.
Which is iconic, honestly.
It is. She also mentions listening to Beyoncé's Lemonade, which, as we all know, is the cultural anthem of surviving infidelity. This immediately sparked rampant speculation among fans about Brian's actions. She focuses on feminizing her home with floral wallpaper, literally rewriting her physical environment to erase the ghost of the homesteading husband.
But you can only outrun the trauma for so long. If you're loving these Hollywood twists, by the way, make sure you're subscribed. We've got even crazier stories ahead.
Oh, absolutely.
So she eventually announces she is stepping back from her job as a labor and delivery nurse. She calls herself a puddle on the floor, and this is where it clicks for me. She compares her grief to labor contractions.
That's such a powerful metaphor.
Right. She says she's fine 1 minute, functioning normally, and then a thought hits, and she is in absolute blinding agony. She steps away because she knows her patients deserve a nurse who isn't emotionally bleeding out.
It's the only ethical choice she could make, but it highlights the sheer devastation of the collapse. She lost her partner, and as a result, she had to surrender her professional sanctuary.
But this brings up a huge contradiction for me. Her final vibe in Birth Vibes is closure. She defines closure as gathering the necessary information to understand an event so that you don't fill the gaps in your memory with fear. But I have to ask you, how is true closure even remotely possible when you are living out your trauma in front of an internet audience? An audience that is actively trying to fill all those gaps for you with TikTok theories and Reddit gossip.
It isn't. It really isn't. Traditional closure requires quiet reflection, facts, and time. The internet provides deafening noise, speculation, and instant demands for content. You cannot heal a wound when millions of people are constantly poking it to see if it still bleeds.
Which brings us to the terrifying double-edged sword of the parasocial relationship. When you invite millions of people into your living room, you can't be surprised when they start rearranging the furniture.
Exactly.
We see this vividly in the pop culture chat Reddit threads. While many fans are fiercely supportive, there is a harsh reality check happening. People are actively begging her to log off.
Because the audience recognizes a psychological trap that Jen is temporarily blinded to the commodification of her trauma. And to her credit, Jen eventually realizes it too. She posts a video expressing deep regret over those initial crying videos.
Yeah, she admits, I posted my real-time pain for it to be witnessed. I just didn't expect so many people to use it for content. She actually has to beg her fans to stop attacking Brian and her family, saying she still loves him.
It is the ultimate Frankenstein's monster of building a brand on radical transparency. You train your audience to expect absolute access to your life. But when the narrative turns dark, you suddenly realize they feel entitled to consume your devastation exactly like they consumed your success.
And later in the episode, we'll talk about the shocking twist nobody saw coming with how the internet weaponized her pain.
Right, because that entitlement takes on a deeply toxic life of its own. Looking at the Reddit sources, we see the situation become a proxy for online culture wars.
Which is so messed up.
It is, and we have to look at this strictly as an observation of internet mechanics. Because Jen has been a vocal advocate for progressive healthcare policies, some politically conservative detractors allegedly weaponized her personal trauma. They celebrated her marital collapse as if it were an ideological victory.
Wow.
It is a chilling example of how parasocial dynamics strip away humanity. Your private, agonizing pain is no longer a human tragedy. It is just a talking point for someone else's political agenda.
That is incredibly grim. But the internet doesn't just judge, it plays detective. And there was a massive theory that emerged from her supporters regarding why this happened. They pointed to her sudden, massive success.
Ah, yes, the success theory. The narrative posited by fans is that Jen, hitting the New York Times list and gaining millions of followers, deeply intimidated her husband.
But is that just internet gossip, or is there a real mechanism at play there?
Well, it is a profound sociological observation. Think about the foundation of their marriage. They built their lives on a traditional homesteading dynamic. There are established, unspoken roles in that environment. But if one partner suddenly becomes a New York Times bestselling author and the primary breadwinner with millions of followers, that domestic power dynamic inverts overnight.
It flips completely.
Exactly. It asks a brutal question of modern relationships. Can a marriage built in the quiet traditional woods survive the blinding glare of viral fame? History tells us that a massive sudden shift in financial and social power often fractures relationships that were built on the old dynamic.
So the plan ruptures, the internet dissects the pieces, and she is left in the rubble. But she doesn't stay there. And this is where the story shifts from a tragedy to a masterclass in resilience.
My favorite part.
She posts a video that is just wildly iconic. It's set to a Cardi B track. Jen is holding up a copy of Birth Vibes, and then she cuts to herself twerking for the camera. She slaps text on the screen, reminding herself and everyone watching that she is a #1 New York Times bestselling author with the fattest ass, and that she is definitively not worthless.
I love that. It is a phenomenal, visceral display of reclaiming agency. She refuses to remain the victim of her circumstances. She actively transitions back into being the author of her own reality, and she embraces this psychological concept of radical acceptance. She posted a quote that captures this perfectly. "Everything I've ever let go of has had my claw marks in it."
I read that, and it just stopped me in my tracks. It's so honest.
Because it destroys the myth of the peaceful breakup. She is acknowledging that moving on isn't a gentle release. It is a violent, agonizing tearing away of a future you desperately wanted to keep. But she commits to that acceptance anyway. She publicly states she is going to model healthy self-worth and strict accountability for her sons. She realizes she cannot control Brian's actions, but she has absolute authority over her own response.
And she takes that authority and turns her pain into purpose. She's working with her therapist, Shamika, who refuses to let her wallow. Jen looks around and acknowledges her immense privilege. She realizes that her financial success, the very thing that may have contributed to the fracture, is the only reason she had the freedom to actually leave a toxic situation.
Which is a luxury so many women don't have.
Exactly. So many women don't have that luxury. So she activates her massive audience. She starts crowdsourcing slogan ideas for T-shirts to raise money for women who are trapped in bad domestic situations and literally cannot afford to escape.
If we pull back and look at the thematic arc of her life, this moment is incredibly poetic. It mirrors the exact lesson from the epilogue of her own book.
The story of Monique.
Right. In Birth Vibes, she shares the true story of a patient named Monique. Monique suffered an unimaginable tragedy, losing premature twins, Dalen and baby B, after having previously lost another son at 21 weeks. It is the absolute darkest depth of human grief.
And yet, biology marches on. Monique's body still went through the postpartum process. Her milk came in.
Exactly. And rather than letting that milk be a constant, torturous reminder of the babies she couldn't feed, Monique made a radical choice. She chose to pump and donate her breast milk. She ultimately supplied milk to 10 other babies across North Carolina. She found a mechanism to channel her absolute worst nightmare into something literally life-giving for others.
That is just incredible.
It is. And that is the exact mechanism Jen is applying now. She is taking the ultimate lesson from her book and applying it to her own wreckage, finding a profound, life-giving purpose in the wake of a devastating, unplannable loss.
So, what does this actually mean for you, listening right now? I think it serves as a massive reality check about the illusion of the curated life. We all engineer our feeds, right? We highlight the successes, the vacations, the perfect families. But it takes an immense, staggering amount of bravery to broadcast the messy, uncurated, agonizing aftermath when the blueprint fails. Jen Hamilton didn't just share the birth of her success, she shared the thick meconium of her reality. And in doing so, she reminded millions of people that they aren't uniquely broken when their own plans fall apart.
And it leaves us with an urgent question about the nature of grief in the digital age. We are living in an era where our lowest, most desperate moments are screenshotted, archived, endlessly debated on Reddit, and turned into monetized TikTok content by absolute strangers.
Which is a terrifying thought.
In an ecosystem like that, is the very concept of moving on completely obsolete. If your trauma becomes a permanent digital artifact that anyone can search for a decade from now, perhaps modern healing isn't about leaving the past behind at all. Perhaps true closure today is simply learning how to coexist with a ghost of your worst day. A ghost that the internet refuses to let die.
Coexisting with the ghost of your worst day, that is something we all need to mull over. You've been listening to Starscope Report, where Jordan and Jamie uncover the stories shaping Hollywood, music, and pop culture. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that keep the stars shining.